Okay, ready to dive into a topic that's all about speed.
Sounds exciting.
Today, we're lacing up our shoes and hitting the track virtually, of course.
Hmm.
We're exploring the world of sprinting, but going beyond the surface, looking at what makes these athletes true masters of speed.
It's fascinating how many people think sprinting is just about, well, being born fast.
Right. Like it's just raw talent, and that's it.
But there's so much more to it.
Absolutely. We're talking history, science, mechanics. There's a whole world of innovation that goes into shaving off those fractions of a second.
It's true. There's a lot that transforms athletic potential into those incredible record-breaking performances we see.
Speaking of history, we actually found sources that take us all the way back to the ancient Olympics.
Oh, wow, really?
You know those classic images of ancient Olympians running in those tunics?
Yeah, I can picture them.
Well, archaeologists have unearthed the actual marble starting blocks they used. Can you imagine?
No way! The actual blocks, what are they like?
They're incredible. They weren't just simple markers either. They had these grooves for the runner's feet to fit into, and they were part of this whole system to get everyone off the line at the exact same time.
Wow, that's incredible. They didn't mess around with false starts back then.
Talk about taking it seriously. They had a system called husplex. Ropes, posts, the works, all designed to ensure a perfectly synchronized start.
That's amazing. It makes you wonder if those ancient innovations actually gave certain athletes an edge back then.
Right. Like, did one type of starting block work better than another? It's fascinating to think about.
It really is.
But I'm getting sidetracked here. Let's fast forward a few centuries. Early modern sprinting had some pretty interesting starting methods.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Think mutual consent.
Wait, they just agreed to start?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Imagine runners sizing each other up, trying to psych each other out, delaying the start.
That sounds chaotic.
Totally. Hardly the picture of a professional race. More like, kids in the park.
Yeah, a bit different from those synchronized starts in ancient Greece.
And the timekeeping back then must have been a nightmare.
Oh, I can only imagine.
It's no wonder they brought in the starting pistol in the late 19th century.
Definitely a game changer. Speaking of those early days, though, didn't we have some debate about the first sub-10-second 100-meter dash?
You're right. Records can be a bit messy. John Owen's time in 1890 is still debated. Officially, though, the credit goes to Jim Hines and Ronnie Ray Smith, both in 1968. They broke that barrier.
2 from the U.S., a big year for the sport then.
For sure. So while we are on the topic of records, let's talk about that moment right before the race even starts, the starting position. Our sources mention something called a kangaroo start. Have you heard of this?
Oh yeah, the kangaroo or bunch start. It popped up back in the 1930s.
So were they actually trying to hop like kangaroos?
Not quite. It's all about foot placement. Dickinson's research back then found that positioning the feet closer together in the blocks helped athletes explode off the line faster.
So it's about those angles.
Exactly, maximizing that initial push-off.
Makes sense. And it's stuck around, hasn't it?
Pretty much. It became the standard by the 1950s. And even now, with some modern tweaks here and there, it's still the go-to technique for most sprinters.
A testament to its effectiveness, I guess. But once those feet leave the blocks, what's going on inside a sprinter's muscles to generate that kind of speed?
Oh, that's where the real science comes in. We're talking about those fast-twitch muscle fibers, specifically type I fibers. They're responsible for those explosive movements, the raw power you see.
So there are different types of muscle fibers, and sprinters rely heavily on these fast-twitch ones.
They do. They're like the nitro boost in a car, giving that incredible burst of speed.
But there's got to be a trade-off, right?
You're right. Those type I fibers, as powerful as they are, they fatigue really quickly. That's why maintaining top speed for too long is near impossible.
So it's a balance.
Exactly. It's a constant push and pull in the body, managing these bursts of energy and the quick fatigue that follows.
It makes you wonder if you can train your muscles to become more like those of a sprinter.
Well, that's the interesting part. While genetics definitely play a role in how many fast-twitch fibers you have, research shows that training can actually help transform certain muscle fibers.
So even if you're not born with a sprinter's physique, you can still train your body to become more explosive.
To a degree, yes. It's not all about what you're born with. It's also about how you train your body to adapt.
That's encouraging. So we've got these powerful muscles, but we've also got technique to consider. And when we're talking about sprinting, stride length seems like a pretty big deal.
Definitely. It's one of those areas where there are a lot of misconceptions. People naturally assume that a longer stride equals greater speed, right?
Yeah, makes sense intuitively.
But it's not always the case.
Yeah.
Overstriding, where your foot lands too far in front of your body, can actually create a braking force.
So instead of propelling you forward, it's actually slowing you down.
Precisely. It's counterintuitive, but longer strides don't always translate to faster times.
So what's the key again? If it's not just about reaching as far as you can with each stride, what is it?
It's about finding that sweet spot, the most efficient stride length for your body. Modern sprinting technique emphasizes optimizing the time your foot is in contact with the ground, maximizing force, and maintaining an upright posture.
So it's less about brute force and more about efficiency.
You got it. It's like a finely tuned machine, every movement working together for maximum output.
Which leads us to what's called modern sprinting technique. And this one might sound a little counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, instead of leaning forward, really reaching for that finish line, sprinters are encouraged to run tall.
Ah, yes. This is where those traditional ideas get flipped on their head.
So what's the thinking behind this sprint lift, as some sources call it?
It's about maximizing efficiency and power. Think of those high knees and almost upright posture.
Like they're almost pulling themselves forward with each step.
Yes, exactly. And then that active, almost clawing motion of the foot striking the ground, it's a different way of thinking about sprinting.
So it's not just about the power phase, the pushing off, but also about how you use your foot to leverage the ground and pull yourself forward.
Exactly. That moment of contact becomes this crucial point for generating propulsion.
We're talking about what athletes like Carl Lewis use, right? It's like they were almost gliding across the track.
Absolutely. They embodied this modern approach. And you mentioned Carl Lewis. He, along with many other elite sprinters, understood the importance of the support phase.
That brief moment when the foot is on the ground.
Yes. They maximize that moment. It's not just about moving your legs quickly. It's about how you leverage the ground, minimize braking forces, and maintain that momentum.
It's like a dance.
It really is. A precise and powerful dance with the ground.
It's amazing how much goes into that short burst of speed, right? We've talked about the starting line, those powerful muscles, and the technique behind each stride.
And we can't forget about what happens once a sprinter hits their top speed.
Right. Maintaining that velocity is just as important as building it.
What's interesting is that this maximum speed phase, as it's often called, isn't just a matter of holding on for dear life.
There's more to it than just gutting it out.
A lot more. Your body is constantly making adjustments, firing off those neurophysiological signals to keep everything in sync.
Because it's like your nervous system is working overtime to maintain that speed.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance between your muscles, your nerves, and your brain. Everything has to be working together seamlessly.
And those strides we talked about, with the perfect balance of length and frequency, that plays a role here too, right?
Absolutely. Finding that optimal stride where you're maximizing speed without creating unnecessary resistance, that's key for maintaining velocity.
It's fascinating how much goes into every aspect of sprinting. It's like a puzzle where every piece has to fit perfectly.
And just like with any puzzle, there are different approaches, different strategies depending on the individual.
Speaking of different approaches, our sources talk about this idea that shorter sprinters might have an advantage in those shorter races. The 100-meter dash, for example.
It makes sense when you think about it. Those shorter, more muscular builds, they're often able to generate incredible power.
So it's about that initial burst, that explosion off the starting line.
Exactly. While taller sprinters might excel in those longer races where endurance comes into play, those longer strides can be an advantage over greater distance.
It's like different body types for different specialties.
Exactly. And it's not just about height or build either. It's about training your body to maximize those natural advantages.
Which brings us back to technique. Our sources talk about a distinction between what they call traditional and modern sprinting techniques. What's the difference?
Well, traditionally, a lot of emphasis was placed on the driving phase.
So that's the part where you're pushing off the ground, propelling yourself forward.
Yes, the focus was on that powerful push from the legs, using those muscles behind the body's center of mass.
So what changed with these modern techniques?
The focus shifted to the support phase, that moment when your foot hits the ground in front of your center of mass.
So instead of just thinking about pushing off, it's about how you land and use that contact to your advantage.
You got it. Modern sprinting is all about using the ground as a launching pad, minimizing any braking forces, and maximizing propulsion with each stride.
Hence the sprint lift we talked about earlier.
Exactly. That upright posture, the high knee drive, that active foot plant, It's all designed to optimize that support phase.
And we can't forget about arm action,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Those arms are working hard, swinging in sync with the legs to generate momentum and help maintain balance.
It's a full-body symphony of motion, isn't it?
Exactly. Everything working in harmony to achieve that incredible speed.
So we've got the starting blocks, the science of muscles, those crucial phases of a sprint. But what about that final push, that last surge of energy as a runner approaches the finish line?
Ugh, the speed endurance phase. That's where mental toughness really comes into play. Your body's screaming at you to stop, but those elite athletes, they find a way to push through.
It's like a battle against your own body at that point.
In a way, it is. It's about digging deep, drawing on those last reserves of energy. Your muscles are fatigued, your energy stores are depleted. It's willpower that gets you across that finish line.
And I imagine technique starts to break down a bit at that point, too.
It can. Maintaining form becomes even more crucial in those final meters as fatigue sets in. Our sources mention something called the lunge finish, which sounds pretty intense.
A last-ditch effort to gain an advantage.
It can be. It's that final stride, throwing your body forward across the finish line.
Sounds risky.
It can be if it's not timed perfectly. Misjudge it, and you risk losing momentum, maybe even taking a tumble right before the finish line.
Not exactly how you want to end a race.
Definitely not.
So we've got this fascinating mix of physical and mental strength that comes into play, especially in those final moments of a race.
Absolutely. But even before we get to those final strides, even before we reach that maximum speed, there's a crucial element we need to discuss: acceleration.
Because getting off to a good start is everything, right?
It's not just about starting quickly, though. It's about the rate at which a sprinter can increase their velocity, that initial burst of speed.
So even if you have incredible top-end speed, if you can't accelerate quickly, you're already at a disadvantage.
Exactly. It's like that saying, you can't win a race in the first few seconds, but you can certainly lose it.
So how do you train for that? How do you improve that initial burst of speed?
That's where the pickup acceleration phase comes in. It's that critical period where a sprinter transitions from building speed to maintaining it, and it's a major focus in training.
So it's like that gear shift in a car, where you go from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds.
That's a great analogy. And just like with a car, you need the right engine, the right mechanics, and the right driver to achieve that kind of acceleration.
Which brings us to the exciting world of training programs, the exercises, the techniques that transform those aspiring athletes into speed demons. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. We'll be right back to break down the ins and outs of sprint training. And we're back, ready to sprint into the exciting world of sprint training. We've seen how much goes into those record-breaking runs, the science, the technique. It's truly fascinating.
It's amazing how specialized training has become. We're not talking about your average gym workout here.
Right, it's not just about lifting heavy weights. So what sets sprint training apart? What are those key elements that help athletes reach their full potential?
It's all about specificity. Every exercise, every drill, it's designed to target those exact muscle groups and movement patterns that translate to power and speed on the track.
So it's about working smarter, not just harder.
Yeah.
Making every movement count.
Exactly. We're talking about engaging those fast-twitch muscle fibers we talked about, building explosive strength in the legs, the core, and fine-tuning that mind-muscle connection so the body moves with precision and power.
And our sources mention plyometrics as a key part of that. Those are the jumping and bounding exercises, right? What makes them so beneficial for sprinters?
They're all about developing that rapid-fire muscle response, that explosiveness you need to get off the starting line and maintain speed.
So it's like training your muscles to react quickly and powerfully, almost like a coiled spring.
Precisely. Think box jumps, depth jumps, those single-leg hops. They force your muscles to work in short, intense bursts, just like in a sprint.
It's amazing how much it mirrors the actual movements of sprinting.
Exactly. And while plyometrics are great for explosiveness, we also need to build that foundational strength. That's where we've seen a shift away from those traditional weightlifting exercises.
So less emphasis on those classic squats and leg presses. What's taking their place?
Instead of just lifting heavy weights, it's about incorporating exercises that more closely mimic the movements of sprinting itself.
So making those gym workouts more specific to the demands of the sport.
Exactly. Things like squat jumps, where you're adding an explosive element to a traditional squat, hang cleans, which engage multiple muscle groups and mimic that explosive pull, even weighted sled pulls.
Sled pulls. Those sound intense. What's the benefit there?
They're fantastic for building strength in those hip extensor muscles, which are essential for driving off the starting blocks and powering through each stride. It's functional strength training at its finest.
It's incredible to see how training has evolved to become so specific, so tailored to the demands of the sport.
Mm.
And speaking of pushing limits, we can't forget about overspeed training.
Ah, yes, overspeed training. That's where things get really interesting.
And it sounds intense, almost like something out of a superhero movie.
Yeah.
What's the idea behind it?
It's based on the principle that to run faster, you need to train at speeds exceeding your current maximum velocity. It's about conditioning your body to those higher speeds, making them feel more attainable.
So tricking your body into adapting to a new normal, how do you actually do that?
One classic example is downhill running. By running down a gentle slope, a runner can achieve those slightly faster speeds than they would on a flat surface.
So using gravity to your advantage.
Exactly. It's a way to condition the body to those higher speeds without pushing to those maximum efforts you'd need on a flat track.
Are there other methods for overspeed training? What about using technology or equipment?
There's assisted sprinting, where you might use a harness and pulley system to provide that extra boost of speed.
So you're getting pulled along almost like you have a superpower. That's amazing.
It's about exposing your body to those higher speeds, even if it's just for short bursts, to help improve your stride frequency and get comfortable with those faster movements.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah.
But what about the flip side? What about training with resistance?
That's where resisted sprinting comes in. It's exactly what it sounds like, adding resistance to your sprints to build strength and power.
So making your muscles work harder with each stride. What are some of the methods for adding that resistance?
You could have a parachute attached to your back, creating drag as you run, or you could pull a weighted sled.
It sounds like a real challenge.
It is, but that's the point. By adding resistance, you're forcing your muscles to work harder, ultimately making them stronger.
So it's about building those powerhouse muscles needed for those explosive starts and powerful strides.
Exactly. Resisted sprinting is particularly useful for developing those starting muscles, improving acceleration, and building overall strength throughout the entire sprinting motion.
It sounds like there's a fine line between pushing your limits and overdoing it.
You're right, it's a delicate balance. Too much resistance, and you risk compromising technique, potentially even leading to injury. It's about finding that sweet spot that challenges you without pushing you over the edge.
So finding the right training program is crucial, one that's tailored to an individual's needs and abilities.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to sprint training. A good program considers your experience, your training age, any injury history you might have, and of course, your goals.
So it's about working with a knowledgeable coach, someone who can assess those individual needs and create a plan that's both effective and safe.
Exactly. And it's not just about pushing athletes to their limits. It's about listening to their bodies, understanding their individual responses to training, and making adjustments as needed.
It's a partnership, really, between athlete and coach, working together to achieve those peak performances.
Precisely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From the ancient origins of sprinting to the cutting-edge science and training techniques used today. It's amazing to see how much goes into those seemingly effortless bursts of speed. It's a testament to human potential, the drive to push those limits and break those records. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it makes you wonder what the future holds for sprinting. With advancements in training, technology, and our understanding of human performance, who knows what those athletes will achieve? That's something to think about as we cross the finish line of this exploration into the fascinating world of sprinting.